the pools and the hidden places. I'm not scared of the sea face.
It was an empty oyster and pearl afternoon. The water lipped at the sand and sorted the shingle and lapped around the rock where the girl was sitting. Then she saw a seal, like a mass of seaweed almost, until she gazed into those eyes. It swam in quite close, just 20 or 30 steps away. She looked at the seal looked at her, and then it barked. It cried out in a loud voice. She stood up on her rock. She called out to the seal, not a word, but a sound, the music that words are made of. The seal swam in a little closer. It looked at the girl, and then it cried. Oh, and the moon's edge and the mother's ache were in that cry. The girl jumped off the rock. Her eyes were sea eyes, wide and flinty grey. Seal, she cried, sea woman, what do you want? And what did the seal want but the girl's company? As she paddled down from the strand, it followed her, always keeping 50 or 20 water steps away, out in the dark swell. The girl turned back towards her rock, and the seal turned with her. Sometimes it huffed and puffed, sometimes it cried. It wailed as if it were lost, all at sea. The girl bent down and picked up a curious shell, opaline and milky and intricate. Listen, sang the wind in the shell's mouth. And then the girl raised the shell and pressed it to her right ear. One afternoon, sang the shell, oyster and pearl, a man came back from the fishing. He was so weary. He peeled off his salt-stiff clothing. He washed. For an hour or 2 hours he closed his eyes, and then, when the moon rose, he came strolling along this strand. He listened to the little waves kissing in the rocks. He smelt the earth on the breeze and knew that it would soon rain. This is where he walked, rocking slightly from side to side, in no hurry at all, for there was nowhere to go. Then he stopped. Down the beach, no more than a distance of a shout, he saw a group of sea people dancing. They were singing and swaying. They danced like the waves of the sea. Then the sea people saw him. At once they stopped singing and broke their bright ring. As the fishermen began to run towards them, they turned towards a pile of seal skins. In the moonlight, they looked like wet rock. They picked them up, pulled them on, and plunged into the water. One young woman was not so quick, though. She was so caught up in the dance, the fisherman reached her skin before she did. He snatched it up and tucked it under one arm, and then he turned to face the sea woman, and he was grinning. Please, she said. Her voice was high as a handbell and flecked with silver. Please. The fisherman shook his head. My skin, said the sea woman, and there she stood, dressed in moonlight, reaching out towards him with her white arms, and he stood between her and the sea. I've landed some catches, breathed the fisherman, but never anything like this. Then the young woman began to sob. I cannot, she cried, I cannot go back without my skin. And this catch I'll keep, thought the fisherman. My home and my family, my friends, said the sea woman. Now she wept, and the moon picked up her salt tears and turned them into pearls. How lovely she was, and lovely in more ways than one. A young woman, lithe as young women are, a sea child, a sister of the moon. For all her tears, the fisherman had not the least intention of giving her back her skin. You'll come with me, he said. The sea woman shuddered. Then the man stepped forward, took her by the wrist. Home with me, he said. The sea woman neither moved towards the man nor pulled away from him. Please, she said. Her voice was sweet and ringing. The sea is my home, the shouting waves, the green light and the darkening. But the fisherman had set his heart against it. He led the sea woman along the strand and into the silent village and back to his home. Then the fisherman shut the door on the sea woman and went out into the night again to hide the skin. He ran up to the haystack in the field behind the house, loosened one of the hay bricks and hid the skin behind it. Within 10 minutes he was back on his own doorstep. The sea woman was still there. Without her skin, there was nowhere for her to go. She looked at the man. With her flint grey eyes, she looked at him. For a moment the girl lowered the shell from her ear. She gazed at the emptiness around her. No one on the beach or on the hill slope leading down towards it. No one between her and the North Pole. The little waves were kissing at their seal, and the seal still kept her company, bobbing up and down in the welling water. "Listen, listen," sang the wind in the shell's mouth, and the girl raised the shell again and pressed it to her right ear. Time passed, sang the shell, and the sea woman stayed with the fisherman. Without her skin she was unable to go back to the sea, and the fisherman was no worse than the next man. For his part, the fisherman fell in love. He had spent half his life in the ocean. He knew all her moods and movements and colours, and he saw them in the sea woman. Before long the man and the woman married, and they had one daughter and then 2 sons. The sea woman loved them dearly and was a good mother to them. They were no different from other children except in one way. There was a thin, half-transparent web between their fingers and their toes. Often the woman came walking along the strand where the fisherman had caught her. She sat on a rock, she sang sad songs about happier times, and at times a large seal came swimming in towards her, calling out to her. But what could she do? She talked to the seal in a language they shared. She stayed there for hours, but always in the end she turned away and slowly walked back to the village. Late one summer afternoon, the sea woman's 3 children were larking around on the haystack behind the house. One of the little boys gave his sister a push from behind, and the girl grabbed wildly on the wall of the haystack. One hay brick came away, and the skin, the sealed skin, that the fisherman had hidden in the one stack after another as the years passed, fell to the ground. The children stopped playing. They fingered the skin. They buried their faces into its softness. They took it back to show their mother. The sea woman dared scarcely look at it, and looked at it, dared scarcely touch it, and touched it. "Mother," said the children, crowding around her, "what is it?" The sea woman pulled her children to her. She dragged them to her and squeezed them. She hugged and kissed each of them, and then she turned and ran out of the house with her skin. The children were afraid. They followed her. They saw her pull her skin on, cry a great cry, and dive off a rock, and then a large seal rose to meet her, and the 2 seals leapt and dipped through the water. When their father came back from the fishing, his children were standing on the stone jetty. "You go home," said the man. "I'll come back in an hour." Slowly the man waded in his salt-stiff clothing along the strand. He kept rubbing his pale blue eyes and looking out across the dancing water. She rose out of the waves. She was no more than a few steps away. "Husband," she cried, "husband, look after our children, take care of our children." Her voice carried over the water. "You've loved me and looked after me, and I've loved you. But for as long as I've lived with you, I've always loved my first husband better." And then the sea woman, the seal woman, slipped under the shallows once more. One moment she was there, the next she was not there. The girl took the opaline shell away from her ear and set it down on the sand. For a long time she sat there. The seal had gone. It had deserted her, and the dark water shivered.